Hello, in this video I'm going to talk about the Fallen Warrior model. Um, it's a 3D printed model that I've painted and embellished. The model is by Kijai and I've linked to the STL in the description below. I've also linked to my blog where I discuss all of my 3D printed paint jobs, as well as a link to another video I've done where I just discuss the materials that I use to paint and finish off my models. So, about this model. Well, this is one of the very, very rare instances where I print something to full scale. And the reason why I printed this in full scale was because he's got this lovely little chest cavity here, which I can stick my paintbrush in, and he needed to be full-sized for that. So yeah, he's really quite a big model for me. But I really enjoyed painting it, and I know that I talk a lot about surface area when I'm discussing these models, but oh my god, this one had the most surface area to paint with a brush of any model I have ever done so far. So yeah, there's so many grooves in here, but that gives a lot of opportunity for some really neat paint effects to take place, and I'll tell you briefly how I achieved this look. First, I'll get down to the printing side of things. This model printed completely supportless, as do most of Kijai's models, which makes it really quite cool to watch printing, but also there's hardly any cleanup involved after it comes off the print bed. With this, I don't think I had to do a single thing to it. So I primed it first, and I did that with a uniform acrylic color. I believe it was gray, because I tend to always do it in gray. And it took a very long time because of all these little nooks and crannies, and you really don't want to half-ass it. If you're going to paint something, you go all the way. Don't leave any spaces unpainted, unfinished, because that's the first place your eyes are going to gravitate toward, the place that doesn't look quite right. So I primed the whole thing. I let that dry for a good day. The next thing I did was I blocked in the colors. Now, instead of going for a grey stone, which I normally will make stones grey, it's just kind of my default, I guess, I went for brown on this one. So I made all of the brown very dark, all of the stone rather, very dark brown. I made the shield a dark brown as well, the hilt of the sword. I made the blade of the sword grey, and I painted the skeleton in kind of an off-white natural color. After all of that was good and dry, it was time to start thinking about shadows, and there were a lot of shadows that I had to put into this, because obviously this was all a uniform color, and I needed to not just rely on light to create the shadows. I needed to really define these grooves as deep, and to make it look as natural as possible when it was all finished. So there were a lot of dark brown to black washes put in all of these crevices all over. There's a brown wash put over the skeleton, which kind of aged it and made it look weathered. The shield was darkened up, especially around the edges. The sword was as well. There's a bit of a black wash put on the blade. And yeah, the shadows went in a few layers. That wasn't just one layer, and it took me probably a couple of days to get the shadows down and dried for all the layers I did. So after the shadows were done, it was time for highlights. and I did highlight some of the bone from where I'd shadowed it too much because I want it to look a bit bleached, not entirely just mucky. And I highlighted these embossed bits of the shield with copper because I wanted the shield to be copper, but obviously I want it to look very weathered, so it's not terribly bright, but you can see some bits of shiny copper shining through. The sword was to match the shield, so that was copper as well. And then it was really time to focus on the stone and getting all of those highlights in. There are about 3 different colors of highlights on these stones. I went into it in a bit more detail on my blog, but I think there was more grey, and then there are 2 layers of brown, each getting lighter, to give it a lot of there's a lot of different colors going on, and it gives it a really natural look. The last color I highlighted onto the stones was green, and that was in the areas that I knew I wanted to put moss in, so it was kind of just mapping it out for where I would add static grass and flocking powder later. Now after the stone was finished, the skeleton was finished, I really wanted to focus on the shield and the sword. I just looked up on Google pictures of oxidized copper, and I kind of copied that the best I could. Not sure if you can see very well from the camera, but it's kind of a greeny blue oxidized copper color worked in there. You can definitely see it a lot better in the still photos that I have on my blog that I took of this model. And once that was all dry, it was time for me to start adding in the embellishments. And I embellished this model with nail flocking powder, which is a fine powder that's for manicures, but I use it on my models because it makes a fantastic moss. I layered that with static grass, which were a few different colors of static grass that I mixed together till I got kind of a mix that I liked. And there's tufts of brown lichen in here as well. And I think there's even a couple tiny bits of clump foliage that I stuck into a few places. So very briefly, the way that I put in my finishing touches is I just use some PVA. That's just white school glue. Americans will know it probably as Elmer's glue, even if it's not Elmer's brand. And yeah, you just brush that in with a paintbrush, and I had already mapped out the areas I wanted the green, so it was quite easy to dab it on and then sprinkle in the bits of the flocking powder followed by the static grass. It goes in kind of like glitter, really. You just lay down the glue, then you sprinkle in the powder and knock off the excess, and you keep doing that until it's layered up the way you like. And the little bits of lichen I also glued in with PVA, but lichen can be a bit tricky, so sometimes super glue is necessary, but that's all I needed to do to achieve this look for this particular model. One thing I didn't mention was the hilt of the sword. Yeah, I that is metallic silver, and then it was darkened up with some washes to age it a bit and make it look like it had been left out in the weather. So yeah, that's pretty much the entire paint job for this one. And it's a multifunctional little desk ornament, really, and it lives on my desk. So that's it. Bye.